Welcome, Mr. Guilbeault. Minister Guilbeault, it's a pleasure to see you once again. A lot of developments have happened since your last visit. We're going to have many things to discuss, and we very much appreciate your presence here today. I'd also like to welcome the new Deputy Minister, Mr. Forbes, who was just appointed, and the other witnesses present from the department. Mr. Minister, I'll give you the floor for 10 minutes. Thank you. Hello to you all, and it's a pleasure to join you and members of the committee to discuss the 2023-2024 main estimates, as well as the 2022-2023 supplementary estimates B and C for my portfolio, which includes Environment and Climate Change Canada, the Parks Canada Agency, and the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada. I'm here with, as you were saying, Mr. Chris Forbes, the new Deputy Minister for Environment and Climate Change Canada, Linda Drainville, ADM, Corporate Services and Chief Financial Officer for Environment and Climate Change Canada, Catherine Blanchard, VP, Finance Directorate, Terence Hubert, President of the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada, and Joël Rafoul, Acting Vice President, Corporate Services and Chief Financial Officer of the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada. Before I get started, I would like to recognize that we are meeting on the traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe, the original stewards of the lands we share today.
Responsibility to strengthen the nation-to-nation, Inuit-to-Crown, and government-to-government relationship with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis through respect, cooperation, partnership, and recognition of rights. Je considère cette responsabilité comme un aspect essentiel des
I see this as critical to the ambitions and actions throughout my portfolio that we're discussing today.
Environment and Climate Change Canada. The department works in collaboration with Canadians across the country, with all sectors of the economy and society, and all faiths, including 2SL LGBTQI+, racialized and vulnerable peoples of all ages, and importantly, Indigenous peoples. Le ministère soutient, dirige et
The department leads, supports, and enables ambitious actions on a wide range of issues and concerns domestically and abroad.
Pollution and managing toxic substances, to slowing the loss of biodiversity, protecting nature and species at risk, plus safeguarding Canadians through its weather and environment predictions. Our government's success in this regard is vital to protect the health and well-being of Canadians, the economy, and the environment. Ce sont des priorités qui vont de pair.
These are priorities that go hand in hand. As you know, we are in a critical decade for addressing the dual crisis of climate change and rapid biodiversity loss, and also plastic pollution. This is a crisis that requires integrated and accelerated efforts to avoid the most catastrophic impacts. It's a crisis that threatens not just our standard of living, but also the future of humanity on this planet.
On a number of ambitious actions, such as achieving net zero emissions by 2050, which is the best way to limit temperature increases to 1.5 degrees Celsius. It's helping to create the conditions necessary for protecting at least 30% of lands and waters in Canada by 2030. Les recherches scientifiques démontrent que c'est le minimum nécessaire.
Scientific research shows this is the minimum that's needed to address the dual crisis. As members know well, when it comes to the environment, collaboration defines success.
Played a vital role in helping to ensure that the global targets align with Canada's target in the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, negotiated at COP15 last December in Montreal. Pour réaliser des progrès continus vers l'atteinte de nos objectifs.
To enable continued progress on our goals, Environment and Climate Change Canada's 2023-2024 main estimates amount to $2.4 billion. This is a 24% increase compared to last year. This includes about $1 billion for planned operating expenditures, over $100 million in planned capital expenditures, and more than $1.2 billion in grants and contributions. Total statutory costs amount to $112 million. In sum, The 2023-24 main estimates represent a net increase of approximately $478 million over the total 2022-2023 main estimates.
Due to new funding for nature-based climate solutions, the recapitalized low-carbon economy fund, as well as the low-carbon economy fund reprofile. New funding will help to protect old-growth forests by advancing urgent protection of vital ecosystems, wildlife habitats, and species at risk, and protecting carbon stores in these areas. Le nouveau financement aidera à protéger les forêts.
Recapitalizing the low-carbon economy fund will help support projects to reduce greenhouse gas emissions that both contribute to Canada's 2030 target and align with goals for net zero emissions.
Will help support projects to reduce greenhouse gas emissions that both contribute to Canada's 2030 targets and align with goals for net zero emissions by 2050. Elle appuiera le renouvellement des volets.
It will support the renewal of the existing streams, the Leadership Fund and Challenge Fund, and adds two new streams, the Indigenous Leadership Fund to support Indigenous-led clean energy and energy efficiency projects, and an Implementation Readiness Fund to support applicants advancing proven low-carbon technologies. Through the 2022-2023 Supplementary Estimates B exercise, ECCC increased its reference levels in the amount of $189.7 million. This update included new funding for the highly successful UN Convention on Biological Diversity, COP15. Funding sought also included initial requirements for the recapitalized low-carbon economy fund, as well as funding for the implementation of the next phase of the Oceans Protection Plan and for advancing a circular economy for plastics in Canada. Mr. Chair, ECCC also participated in the 2022-23 Supplementary Estimate C process in order to drive further progress in the fight against climate change and to protect and conserve nature. Through this process, the Department's reference levels were increased by a net amount of $15.8 million, bringing the Department's total financial authorities to $2.3 billion in 2022-2023. These estimates included a funding transfer from Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development to support the Partnership for Market Implementation, as well as funding for the BC Old Growth Nature Fund.
Let's turn to Park Canada. Pour 2022-2023,
For 2022,
10 minutes, sorry.
I'll just start again the last paragraph. Pour 2020,
For 2022-23, Parks Canada received $75.1 million through Supplementary Estimates B and sought $9.9 million through Supplementary Estimates C. Supplementary Estimates B funds helped Parks Canada invest in its assets to support transition to long-term sustainability, support the Trans-Canada Trail, and invest in community trail connections to Rouge National Urban Park and implement federal framework to address the legacy of residential schools. Supplementary Estimate C funds will support disaster relief and restoration efforts through the Hurricane Recovery Fund, implement the Impact Assessment Act, and transfer funds from the Department of Natural Resources to support the planting of trees at various Parks Canada administered sites. Parks Canada's 2023-24 main estimates are $1.3 billion.
$305.4 million, or 31% when compared to last year's. This increase is primarily due to funding to help Parks Canada transition towards long-term sustainability of its infrastructures. Parks Canada mandate is protecting national treasures in Canada. À bien des endroits, son succès repose sur les actifs.
In many places, its success centers on assets such as the fortifications of Quebec or the Halifax Citadel.
Of shared pride for Canadians. Assets such as the Trans-Severn Waterway and Trans-Canada Highway also support critical functions such as transportation, water management, and services to residents and businesses. Le financement lancera des travaux essentiels.
Funding will initiate critical, time-sensitive work on Park Canada's assets. This includes high-priority capital projects, asset assessments, inspections, and critical maintenance to improve asset condition and greening operations across the country. Funding in the 2023-24 main estimates will also go towards the agency's work to support healthy natural infrastructure and increased access to nature and Canada's conservation targets. It will also strengthen the protection and recovery of species at risk and their habitats, and, importantly, advance reconciliation through Indigenous leadership in conservation. Parks Canada is working with partners to explore the expansion of the park system with a focus on urban parks and connecting more Canadians with nature and cultural opportunities. The agency will continue working with partners to consider the creation or enhancement of national protected areas and cultural landscapes, as well as the creation or enhancement of urban parks and ecological corridors.
To supporting place-based approaches to Indigenous leadership and stewardship of the lands, water, and ice of traditional territories, ancestral homelands, and treaty lands within Parks Canada administered places. Enfin, Parcs Canada continuera de protéger.
Finally, Parks Canada will continue to protect, present, and manage existing national historic sites, national parks, heritage canals, national marine conservation areas, and one national urban park in Canada for the benefit and enjoyment of Canadians and visitors from around the world. Mr. Chair, turning now to the impact. Mr. Minister, we're at 11 minutes already. So we will touch on the subjects that you were going to deal with. Mr. Deltel, 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Colleagues, Mr. Minister, Deputy Ministers, thank you. It's a pleasure to see you here, Mr. Minister. You all know that climate change is real, and we all have to make efforts in order to reduce pollution. I would like to congratulate the Minister. Your car is a 100% electric car, and I know that as much as possible, in the best of worlds, you're taking the train to do the Montreal-Ottawa trip. Last week, we had to cut short the conversation because you had to make your way to the train station. And that is why 2 weeks ago, March 13th, I, as many people, went to the International Summit for Electric and Smart Vehicles. There were thousands of people there and the Prime Minister of Canada, and they went to this event by plane using a Challenger jet for a 22-minute flight. It's not the first time that the Prime Minister was using the Challenger plane to go to do the Montreal-Ottawa route. On December 6th and 7th, he did this trip with the Challenger. So let's understand. It's normal for the Prime Minister to go throughout the country. It's normal that he has security measures. But sincerely, Mr. Minister, what do you think of your Prime Minister and the MP from Montreal, who's doing Ottawa-Montreal with a jet for 22 minutes in the air? Is anyone taking the environment into account then? Thank you, Mr. Deltel, for your question, and thank you for your words as a chair to work with you and your colleagues on these issues. So, as you said, as much as I can, I try to take the train between Montreal and Ottawa. And so I am a minister. I am not the Prime Minister. I don't have a security detail that has to accompany me everywhere. This would make it really difficult, for example, if the Prime Minister wanted to take the train. But other than this issue, what we're working on with our colleagues at Transportation is to try to significantly improve the rail corridor between Quebec and Windsor so that it be easier, quicker, and more dependable than it is now. And so, according to many studies that have been conducted, this will reduce the use of air travel and reduce pollution. Well, that's really interesting, but my question dealt with the use of planes, and we know these are highly polluting for a 22-minute flight by the Prime Minister. And last week, the Challenger of the Prime Minister flew empty for 10 minutes. So anyone who knows aviation knows that when you take off and you land, this really expends a lot of fuel. So as Minister for the Environment, how can you say that it's fine, it's a security issue? No, it's not. Remember, when you were elected in 2019, your party, your government, your leader had 2 planes. For the campaign, there was the 737. It's one of the most polluting planes in the market. So, Mr. Minister, here's the question. As Minister of the Environment, wouldn't it be important to tighten up the use of planes to be coherent in one's approach? When you spend your entire days going throughout the world, as the Prime Minister is doing, preaching to everyone about the environment. Answer, well, I don't share your characterization of the Prime Minister's speech on these issues, but we can agree that we disagree. But we can look at anecdotal cases, and we can do this for a very long time, but my role is to work for the entire Canadian population and to try to reduce the carbon footprint. And the good news is that GHG emissions in Canada are going down. You'll say that in 2020 there was a pandemic. Yes, there was no pandemic in 2019, and greenhouse gas emissions went down. And so the next inventories will be published in April, and I think we'll continue to see a decline in good news in Canada. So we can look at one person and say, oh, wow, this person, but I'm working for millions of Canadians, and I'm trying to help these millions of Canadians to reduce their carbon footprint, especially in the transportation sector. 2 planes on the campaign trail is not, has never been seen, and this was your first election campaign. I don't know how you tolerated it. This is another subject now. COP20, the last COP, many Canadians participated. We saw the last figures. Taxpayers paid for over $1 million for hotel rooms. We understand, and this is a specific discussion, but $1 million in hotel rooms for 113 participants with rooms that cost over $1,500 a night. Here's the question. 113 participants, Mr. Minister. You had all the facilities in the world to do this over the internet. Why? Why did you have such a large delegation for 12 days, 113 people? And all this was paid for by the taxpayers for the hotels. 113 people. Did you need these many people? Wouldn't it have been possible to save some money? And here's my specific question. What was the environmental footprint of these 113 people that cost $1 million in hotel rooms? When I think that the size of the Canadian delegation, and I remind you, it's one of the most open ones. We have parliamentarians in our delegation, as some of you, Indigenous representatives, youth, union representatives, industry representatives, and representatives from the oil and gas industry, and I defended their presence because I believe as a democratic society, our delegation has to reflect society. So it's not because there are people that if you don't like what they have to say, that we shouldn't hear what they have to say. Mr. Turnbull.
Turnbull. Oh, I'm sorry. I have Turnbull, but it's Ms. Taylor-Roy. Okay.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello, Mr. Minister. First of all, I'd like to thank you and thank all the officials for being here today. I'd also like to congratulate you for the progress that you and your team have accomplished in the implementation of your mandate.
It's much easier for me. But first, I want to thank you for all the work you've done for millions of Canadians in reducing our emissions and fighting climate change. And I'd like to turn to some issues that have perhaps a broader impact on that topic. And I'd like to also acknowledge that my fellow committee member, Lloyd Longfield, isn't here today, and he has done so much work on this and has actually prepared questions which I am asking on his behalf. So the first question I'd like to ask is regarding the Net Zero Accelerator Fund. And in particular, in these estimates, there is a transfer of $1.260 million from the Department of Industry to the Department of Environment. And I'm just wondering how specifically that's going to be used, because this is obviously a very important initiative in reaching our climate targets. Thank you.
Yes, the Strategic Innovation Fund, an $8 billion fund, Net Zero Accelerator, is providing funding to support projects to accelerate decarbonization on a very large scale. We're seeing the benefits of this tool almost on a daily basis when we look at the work that my friend and colleague, the Minister of Innovation and Economic Development, Mr. Champagne, has done, basically transforming in the process of transforming Canada's auto industry. We're seeing right now the largest investment in the history of the auto sector for decarbonization and for pivoting this sector from producing internal combustion engine to electrification. And even President Biden was singing the praises of the Volkswagen announcement that was made a couple of weeks ago. So more specifically, the transfer fund via Memorandum of Understanding will support a number of activities at Environment and Climate Change Canada, including conducting technical review, assessment of GHG reduction potential, and alignment with NZA, the Net Zero Accelerator objectives for statement of interest. Basically, what the department does is provide technical and GHG result monitoring expertise during the due diligence process and project implementation phase, and contribute to ad hoc policy, regulatory, and technical discussions impacting project approval and implementation. So we're working very closely with our colleagues from industry to ensure that the projects that are chosen have the most impact obviously from an economic perspective, but also from a greenhouse gas reduction perspective.
Merci. And I'd now like to turn to a question about the Impact Assessment Agency. So the budget for the Impact Assessment Agency is being decreased by $5 million. And my question is why and why now? Especially in Ontario, as you know, it's given the vital role the Impact Assessment Agency is playing or will play in protecting the Greenbelt. It's a great concern, and thank you so much for your recent announcement regarding that. I think the work that the Impact Assessment Agency is doing is vital. So just a question is, why is it being reduced then right now by $5 million?
Well, thank you for your question, and thank you for your comment on the Green Belt. I think, like many, we feel that it's important for the federal government to ensure the environmental integrity of the Rouge National Park, but also the environmental integrity of protected lands in Ontario. So the decrease of $5 million is actually a transfer to CERNA related to the Indigenous agenda. So as such, it falls under the transfer payment vote and not under the agency's operating vote. In other words, it has no bearing on the agency's capacity to deliver high-quality impact assessments, and I totally agree with you. I mean, if there was ever a time where we needed a strong, robust, independent impact assessment agency, it's now, and we fought for this, and in fact, we're still fighting in the Supreme Court, unfortunately, against a number of provinces who don't want to have truly meaningful and impactful impact assessment that would include Indigenous people, that would include looking at the impacts of climate change of projects that are being proposed. We disagree with those views, and which is why we're fighting all the way to the Supreme Court to be able to have a robust system in Canada.
Thank you, and I appreciate you taking on that fight. I know it's difficult when you're collaborating with the provinces to make progress and at the same time sometimes have to challenge them. So I appreciate the dual role you're playing there. How much do I have? Another 45 seconds. So very quickly then, I'd like to go back to the Taking Action on Clean Growth and Climate Change Initiative. That fund, as we know, is very important for research, and again, there's an increase of $350,000 of support for that, and I'm just wondering how that will be used as well.
So, thank you for the question. So, one of the ways it will be used is through the academic engagement strategy. Environment and Climate Change Canada has launched a competitive process to fund research related to priority policy areas. For example, the Economic and Environmental Policy Research Network was first funded via a 5-year, $500,000 contribution agreement, and we renewed that after 2017.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to stop there and go to Madame Posey.
Okay. Thank you.
Madame Posey, la parole est à vous.
Merci. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Minister, for being here with us, and thank you to all the officials for being here. I'm going to begin by saying that I'm going to talk about COP15 and tell you congratulations because an agreement was signed, and I think that yourself and all the people who accompanied you had an impact on the agreement. However, there are some initiatives that go against the objectives, and we know that biodiversity and climate change are intimately linked. So I would like to hear you speak on Trans Mountain. We saw in the media that there was a 2.4 million in grants. It's not this 2.4 million that interests me. It's the $30 billion, because that's where we are now, 30.5 billion. We're talking about 44% increase since the beginning of the pandemic. And this is this raised a lot, raised my ire and my concern. I understand inflation, and so for sure, there's been inflation, this project that has been denounced by the Bloc since 2018 when it was announced. Many analysts, independent analysts, have concluded after this 30 billion, and I could almost put this in parentheses, the reselling of will require guarantees by the government to investors and banks that will fund this purchase. So when the government is saying, oh, well, we will resell this, everything is going to be recuperated, all the... I don't think so. It's not going to work that way. So, Mr. Minister, you know that it's essential to act with the legislation, the decarbonization, and funding of technological innovative solutions for renewable energy. All these files are something where these $30 billion could have been spent. And my leader had said in the beginning, we're talking about, it was 7 or 10 billion at the time, that we as Quebecers could say, take this money and put it in Alberta to help the workers to get out of the oil industry. But the government is once again dragging us into this quagmire. Do you think that we should get out of this TMX issue? On the financial aspects of the project, I'm the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change and not the Minister of Finance, so I'm not able to give an opinion, but what I can tell you is that we are already, and we've invested $120 million in the electrification of transportation and clean transportation per capita. This is 3 times more than what the Americans will do with their Inflation Reduction Act. So in the U.S., if they invested as much per capita, it wouldn't be 300 billion, it would be 1,000 or something like that. And in the IRA, not a cent has been spent. It will come. It still has to go through a number of steps before the American Congress. And we are making this investment right now. For example, for transportation, 300 projects are being realized. They're under construction with shovels in the ground. So we didn't wait. So we are in the shift. Yes, but there are billions and billions that are given for initiatives that go against the objectives of the 1.5 degrees in Paris. And there was a report last week that, Trans Mountain, we can talk about Baie du Nord, we can also talk about exploration permits for the Atlantic coast, and now you've just given the green light to GNL for BC. Yes, with the agreement of the NDP, but once again this was given, but GasLink, this is another project that started out at 6.2 billion, now it's 14 billion. As a taxpayer, I can tell you that I've had it to see all this money being thrown into projects that go completely against what we need to do for the planet, for nature, for the environment, for human health. There's a lot of elements in what you've just said, but it turns around fossil fuel grants. We eliminated any international grants to fossil fuel companies. And when we look at what's happened, for example, over the past few years, the fossil fuel grants went from 12 billion to this year, almost nothing. The investment in green technology have gone up by several $1 million, not at the same rhythm as the reduction to fossil fuel companies. So a lot less was spent in fossil fuel companies. More money was put into clean technology. If that's not the shift, I don't know what it would be. So now, if we talk about the Kitimat project, this was assessed within an agreement between BC and the federal government. The province did the assessment. The province gave the green light. Of course, Ottawa has a role to play, but it's not the federal government that did the assessment of this project, and it's not a project where the federal government is investing. Let's be clear. There are projects where people are investing private funding, and it's not a government project. Thank you. Mrs. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank the Minister for being here and the officials as well. Just want to follow up on some of the questions around Trans Mountain. You know, the cost of Trans Mountain has ballooned. When it was at $20 billion, the Parliamentary Budget Officer said that it was magical thinking to think that there was going to be any profit from this. You just said that as the Minister of Environment, you can't really comment on the finances, that's up to the Minister of Finance. But your predecessor, Minister Wilkinson, when he was here at committee, said that the proceeds from Trans Mountain were going to fund climate action. I'm curious if now, as the Minister of Environment, you can admit that purchasing the Trans Mountain pipeline was a mistake.
As I said to your colleague, I'm not the Minister of Finance. I don't have expertise in this field, so I would be happy to ask you a question or to
as
pose
a
question
Minister
to
of the government, knowing that your government purchased the Trans Mountain pipeline, it's now going to be over $30 billion, money we could have put into climate action. Clearly, the government's going to lose money on the sale of Trans Mountain. Are you disappointed?
Again, you should really ask your question to the Minister of Finance. And I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not the Minister of Finance.
But you are the Minister of Environment, and this money could have been spent on climate action. $30 billion.
We're spending $120 billion. We're the second-ranking G20 country in terms of our green investment.
I hear that you're not going to answer the Trans Mountain pipeline question.
I've answered it a number of times. I said you should ask the Minister of Finance that question because it is a financial question.
You yourself won't, as a minister of this government, won't answer the question of whether you feel disappointed or you think that it's a mistake that the government purchased the Trans Mountain pipeline, which is now going to cost $30 billion.
As you well know, I have worked since I've been nominated Environment and Climate Change Minister very hard to ensure that Canada reduces its carbon footprint, to ensure that, and we've worked together on that.
Thank you, Minister.
To eliminate fossil fuel subsidies.
Maybe I can ask you some questions
that.
about the water agency.
Yes.
In the supplementary estimate B, the ministry is requesting $3 million for funding for the Canada Water Agency. We were expecting to hear an announcement on the launching of the Canada Water Agency last year. Still no word. So I'm curious if you have a timeline for when we expect to see the Canada Water Agency announced.
Well, we've already announced that we would have an independent Canada
Water Agency. I guess when will it be launched? It's coming. There are some. As you can imagine, we're creating a new emergency. It's not something that can be done overnight. I would add that last week we made historic investment in the Great Lakes, $420 million, the single largest investment in Great Lakes. Just on the Canada Water Agency and the Freshwater Action Plan, your government promised $1 billion over 10 years. So each year that would be $100 million. That money didn't come through last year. This year it looks like it's $3 million, so a measly 3% of that. The longer we wait for the Canada Water Agency to be launched, the harder it is to get that money out the door. And I'm just curious, are we expecting in 2024 to see the government make up for that kind of funding gap? $1 billion over 10 years, I would hope would be front-loaded. You know, freshwater advocates are saying they'd like to see $1 billion over 5 years. But even just to meet the commitment that you've made, I would expect to see at minimum $100 million a year. So I'm curious, A, when that water agency is going to be launched so that we can get the funding at the door, and if there is going to be makeup in the coming years to make sure that we're following through on that commitment.
We just announced $420 million last week. So that's almost half of our billion-dollar commitment to freshwater in Canada. So I think we're
Front-loading?
Front-loading, thank you. This and obviously we don't want to, we can't announce all of the money before the agency is created. It's going to take some time for the agency to be up and running, but we're not waiting for that to happen, and we're already investing historic amount of money into freshwater protection in Canada.
Thank you. And just, I wanted to ask a couple of questions about tailings ponds. And Mr. Chair, how much time do I have?
About a minute.
Okay. So new research is showing that tailing ponds from the oil sands surpass 1.8 trillion liters. That grows daily. There's currently no legislation to enforce oil and gas companies to take on the environmental costs and economic liabilities, which is a risk to taxpayers. You know, in this committee, we saw Conservatives and Liberals vote to take out the words tailing ponds from S5, the bill on the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. I'm curious if you would like to see those words put back in to ensure that we're addressing this and that our Canadian Environmental Protection Act covers tailings ponds.
So as you probably know, we have a Crown Indigenous Working Group on tailing ponds, and our commitment is to find a long-term, environmentally durable solution to oil sands tailing ponds. I know there's a proposal in the House to reintroduce, to make an amendment to S5. I'm very open to this amendment. As you know, I have also proposed that we change the way we do monitoring and reporting on tailing ponds, which would include, for the first time, Indigenous people, the federal government, obviously the province of Alberta, and industry as well.
We have to stop there and go now to the 5-minute round, starting with Mr. Lake.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to focus on the website for the Canadian Energy Regulator, a government website. Its most recent data, 2021. And in 2021, the total cost of imported crude oil in Canada was $14.7 billion, an increase of 30% over the previous year. Of that $14.7 billion, we brought in 15% from Saudi Arabia for over $2 billion. We brought in 13% from Nigeria for $1.9 billion, so over $4 billion from those two countries. Is oil coming from Saudi Arabia and Nigeria subject to the same rigorous regulations around upstream and downstream emissions as oil coming from Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Newfoundland and Labrador?
Thank you for the question. I have, as you know, the Canadian Energy Regulator falls under Minister Wilkinson, so natural resources. I don't have the data that you're referring to in
so my
front of
question is
me.
just a straight up yes or no, because you're the Minister of the Environment. Is oil coming from Saudi Arabia and Nigeria subject to the same rigorous emissions on upstream and downstream emissions as oil coming from Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Newfoundland and Labrador?
I don't know by heart the regulations or legislation in Saudi Arabia.
Okay,
I would imagine that Canada's are more stringent, but I don't have any material to
the
to
rules
compare
that
there.
Canada has applies to oil coming from Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Newfoundland and Labrador would be more strict than the rules Canada applies to oil coming from Nigeria and Saudi Arabia. Canada's own rules. We treat our oil more toughly than we treat foreign oil coming over here. I think the answer is yes to that.
Well, I think, as you can imagine, we can't impose, it's very difficult to impose our bodies of laws and regulations to other nations, just like
Right. No,
we would find it
agreed.
difficult for other
Agreed.
nations to impose their
I'm going
bodies.
to move on. On refined petroleum products, okay, same website. 2021, the total cost of imports, $16.8 billion, up 50% from the year before. From the Russian Federation, 2.4% of those, for a total of over $400 million in 2021. Was that oil coming from Russia subject to the same rigorous regulations on upstream and downstream emissions as oil coming from Alberta, Saskatchewan, Newfoundland, and Labrador?
If we want to do a comparison of oil import, I would be happy to provide the committee with some data that shows that under the previous government, the imports of oil from other countries than Canada was 50% higher than what it is today. And I could provide...
Let's just... I just would like the question, the Q&A to be a little more orderly, but go ahead, Mr. Lake.
To be clear, he can table anything he wants after the fact, but he's not answering the question. To what level does the minister have access to information regarding emissions in Russia and the regulations around emissions?
Emissions are available through inventories that are submitted
does the minister
to the
trust
United Nations.
Whatever information would be coming from Russia on their emissions, upstream and downstream?
We rely on international agencies like the UNFCCC or the IPCC for these informations.
Okay, I'm sure Russia has a great record in terms of their reporting to international agencies.
And as you know, we don't import any more Russian oil in Canada.
In 2021, it was over $400 million in refined petroleum products in 2021.
But we don't
Oil and
anymore.
gas in Canada, revenues from that fund important things like our healthcare services and our education systems. What does the minister's research shows that the revenues Russia generated from oil sold to Canada might have funded in 2021?
As you know, we don't import any more Russian oil in Canada.
Could it have been foreseen, though, that Russia might have used the revenues from the sale of from oil purchased in Canada over the last 7 years, say, for something nefarious like the war in Ukraine right now?
As you're probably aware, under the previous government, the import of oil was about 50% higher than what it is today, including from countries like
to be
Russia.
fair, the Liberal government's been in power for almost 8 years, right? We're talking about 2021 numbers, so there were many years to make decisions on this. Does the honourable member, does the minister perhaps regret rules that benefited foreign oil from Russia, Saudi Arabia, Nigeria, and other countries over Canadian oil based in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Newfoundland, and Labrador?
We cut down oil imports. Our government cut down oil imports by about 50% compared to the previous government. So I guess that tells you how much we care about this
we're
much more than the previous government did.
Yeah,
Your regulations are
Mr. Lake, we're out of time. So we'll go to Mr. Weiler now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to also thank the Minister and officials for being here today to answer questions on mains and subs today. There are a few issues that I hear about that generate as much concern as the continued high level of logging of old-growth forests in BC by our NDP provincial government. And this is very frustrating because we know how cherished these irreplaceable ecosystems are. And as a result, we're seeing major protests right across the province. The main estimates and subsidies include an increase in almost $27 million for the BC Old Growth Nature Fund. And so my question for the minister is, what's holding up the launch of the Old Growth Fund, and what is the Government of Canada prepared to do to protect some of our last intact old growth forests?
Thank you for the question. Obviously, old growth forests and species that are dependent on them are found primarily on provincial lands. So we continue to look first to the province to protect and recover species at risk on those lands and to manage its forestry sector. That being said, the establishment of the Old Growth Nature Fund is in progress. The funding agreement is also in place. We are currently negotiating a trilateral nature agreement with province and Indigenous partners. We've had, in fact, several meetings in the past few weeks specifically on that with the province and with Indigenous partners. The agreement will help all parties to better protect and restore habitats, including old-growth forests, improve ecosystem resilience, and advance the recovery of species at risk. With respect to spotted owl in particular, I recently determined that the species is facing imminent threats to its survival and recovery. So I'm now consulting with the government of British Columbia and First Nations communities on my finding. While the federal government continues to prioritize collaboration with provinces and partners on these issues, I will use the authorities outlined in the federal legislation if British Columbia's protection effort for the species should be determined to be ineffective.
Thank you so much for that. That's good to hear. And I know there's lots of private capital as well that's interested in contributing to the conservation of some of our most important ecosystems. In your opening, you mentioned that Canada has budgeted about $120 billion since 2015 to tackle climate change. And you also mentioned that the most recent greenhouse gas inventory for 2021 is going to be released in the coming weeks here. So, Minister, I was hoping you could share with the committee what have been the results in emissions reductions since 2015 outside of the fossil fuel sector.
Thank you. So, as you rightly point out, we are in the process of deploying more than $120 billion of investment to tackle climate change, restore nature, and fight plastic pollution. These investments, along with policies, regulation, tax incentives, and other measures taken since the adoption of the 2016 Pan-Canadian Framework, have enabled Canada to bend its GHG emissions curve downward. So when we came in 2015, emissions were, the sky was the limit. And what we've worked on over the past few years is to bring that curve down. And now, in the 2022 National Inventory Report, the data shows that Canada's greenhouse gas emissions have decreased to 672 megatons. So that's a 9.3 reduction below 2005 levels, the baseline against which Canada's climate effort are measured. Obviously, that's not enough. We need to do more, and emissions trend have remained consistent with previous editions of the Canada NIR, unfortunately, with emission increases in the oil and gas and transportation sector being offset by decrease in other sectors. So clearly we need to work harder on every sector of our economy, but those two sectors, transport and oil and gas, represent more than 50% of our greenhouse gas emissions. So there is a specific targeted effort that needs to be done in these two sectors.
Thank you. And I want to ask a question on that because emissions from oil and gas are the largest and, of course, fastest growing in Canada, growing by over 20% since 2005. And the emissions reductions plan has committed to reducing emissions by 41% relative to 2019 levels. So one of the things we've committed to is bringing in a cap to cap and reduce emissions from oil and gas. And given that BC is now committed to bring in a similar cap and requiring new projects to be net zero by 2030, I'm wondering what that means for Canada as a whole.
Unfortunately, Minister, you'll have to work that answer into another answer. Madame Posé, vous disposez de 2 minutes et demie là pour
2.5 minutes, Mrs. Posé. Earlier, you opened the door, Mr. Minister, on Exportation and Development Canada following the Glasgow commitments. Should we stop funding in national projects? Oil Change International saw that Export and Development Canada was still funding projects in the U.S. They found that it was for $7.5 million in funding. So at some point, someone has to tighten the screws at Export and Development Canada. And credible organizations such as World Energy Outlook, International Energy Agency, GIEC, there's investments in energy efficiency, investments in renewable energy. Well, that is what we need. That's what's important in order to face the energy crisis and not to invest in oil and gas and fossil fuels. My question is the following. Canada, for these commitments, Canada, for the Glasgow commitments, put some exceptions in there. And I did not see that any other countries had done this. They put the exemption for national security, continued support to natural gas and carbon cap. Capping and stocking. Well, what we published following our Glasgow commitments was at the end of last year. And things cannot be done immediately. So I saw the assessments that you're talking about from Oil Change International, and it's based on older data. So what we'll have to do is, as of this year, what will EDC do? You're talking about $7.5 million. Well, we were at $12 billion of investment in 2018 in fossil fuels, according to EDC. So we went from 12 billion to 7.5 million. Well, I think it was more than, they said they found 5 million, but there was, yes, it's a lot. It's a lot of progress in the correct direction, the right direction. I think that we have to draw the line between investments in fossil fuel that allow to increase production and investment in decarbonization. Our commitment towards the regions and the sectors of activity in Canada, we're going to work with all the sectors to help them to decarbonize. We're working with the aluminum sector, other sectors.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the Minister again for being here to answer questions. I just wanted to quickly follow up. You said you were open to the amendment that I've tabled around reintroducing the words tailings ponds to the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. Is that supportive, open, or can you clarify?
To be quite honest, I learned about it over the weekend, so I haven't had a chance to be properly briefed by the department and the team on it. But as an initial reaction, very open to it.
Thank you. And then I wanted to also ask, there is a requirement for a 2026 emissions objective in Canada's Net Zero Climate Accountability Act. And has that been set, and what is the emissions reduction objective for 2026?
You're talking about the interim target on the way to 2030. We are in the process of elaborating that. We have to do an update to the emissions reduction plan by the end of the year this year, and starting this year, it's going to be every 2 years. So we're still working on that.
Will we have the 2026 emissions objective by the end of this year?
I can't answer that at this point, but I would be happy to follow up with your office.
Okay, great. And then I wanted to follow up on, you had mentioned the announcement 3 days ago, which I quickly looked up, the $420 million. It's $420 million over 10 years. So again, when it comes to kind of front loading, this still doesn't tell me how much is being spent this year, when that $420 million will be spent, and if it's going to be spent in the, this minority parliament even. Given that we have at most until 2025, I'm curious how we're going to ensure that the commitment that the government made for $1 billion over 10 years is actually going to materialize.
I don't have the details in terms of how and at what speed the $420 million will be spent, but I can assure you that some of the money will start to be spent very, very soon. We need to act as rapidly as possible, but we need, as someone who comes from the environmental sector, the one thing that we really didn't like is, there's a lot of money, and then all of a sudden there's no more money. So you want to have sustained amount of money so you can continue to work, to support your scientists, to support the organizations on the ground doing the work. So it's important that their investment initially, but you want to sustain it over time.
Thank you. We'll go now to Mr. McLean.
Bienvenue, ministre, et vos...
Welcome, Mr. Minister, and to your officials. Thank you for being here today.
This current year, you've, Minister, allocated over $2.5 million extra for grants and contributions for the Trans Mountain Expansion Project. Can you tell this committee to which organization you gave those funds?
I don't have that information. Could you please, Linda? Merci.
Well, let me go on to the next question. You bought this for $7.4 billion back in 2018. You're now over $22 billion over budget in building this. It is a ridiculous execution. Obviously, something has not gone right. The pipe's been purchased. The route is roughly the same as it was before. So $22 billion has been spent on something that isn't, as your government would say, just inflation. Can you tell us what allocated expenditures led to a quadrupling of costs in this project when the hard costs were virtually locked in?
As I told to your colleagues, I'm not the finance minister, well, I would be happy to turn to finance and ask them to provide written information on this to the committee.
Well, thank you, and I have, and they haven't answered, but thank you. But to add delays and confusion, your department, you, promulgated some regulations last year in June that, migratory birds regulations that delayed the construction of Trans Mountain by another 3 years, potentially at Bridal Falls. This is new regulation in the midst of construction. Would you say that you're a little complicit in putting hurdles in the way to stop this pipeline and actually make it much more expensive for Canadian taxpayers?
We would have to verify the premise of your question that first, we have a responsibility to protect species, and we take this responsibility very seriously, and that migratory bird regulations that were put out were saluted by many. In terms of the added 3 years delay, I'm not sure I can accept this.
Thank you, Minister. Let's get it on notice here then.
Question.
But it's a pileated woodpecker. It's the only land-based bird that was added, and most Canadians will tell you that a pileated woodpecker is not an endangered species. Let's get on to it. It's a group called Community Next Funding Network, funded by, backed by the Dogwood Initiative, that actually found the nest shortly after your rules were promulgated. Can you tell us if any of the money and the grants and contributions from your department actually goes to either of these organizations to help thwart Trans Mountain pipeline expansion?
We fund hundreds of organizations every year. We can certainly verify that. I don't have that information with me now, but we would be happy to follow up.
Please, we'll table out all the organizations that you're funding that are potentially involved in holding up this pipeline. It's much appreciated. And I'm wondering if those are included in the $22 billion cost overruns here that Canadians are bearing. But before being elected in 2019, you more or less said that this pipeline gets built, and paraphrasing, but over your dead body. And now you're in cabinet, and effectively you have a different position in cabinet, but it seems that you're in some kind of conflict with the Minister of Finance here on getting this pipeline built. Let me point out, this pipeline would benefit Canada to over $20 billion annually, and yet somehow it's not being built. It continues to run into hurdles, much of which I'm pointing out here today. Now, this is a large amount for us to be actually subsidizing, if you will, the hurdles that are on the way. But $22 billion over budget, years of delay, and yet when we have to deliver oil to Europe, the government's response is, we can't help Europe with oil. Can you see now the consequences of not getting Canadian resources to market effectively?
I don't recall saying what you said. I said, if you would be so kind as to provide us with the information, that would be super. As you know, this pipeline is mostly for the Asian market and not for Europe. Most, at least that's what I've read from most analysts and experts who've written on the subject.
Well, seaborne oil is seaborne oil, Mr. Minister. Once you get oil on the open waters, it goes wherever the market dictates it goes. And if ours goes south to the U.S. or east to Asia, that means something else is freed up to go elsewhere. We're not part of the solution. We're part of the energy insecurity we have helped Russia deliver around the world. This is a problem that we've contributed to because of a lack of foresight, a lack of ability to develop Canadian resources. Well, this is on your government's watch, so don't try and blame the previous government for this. And I'll note that, we talk about greenhouse gas increases, and one of my colleagues around the table here has said that Canada's gone up 20%, our oil and gas industry. That's fine, but it's been a doubling of production. So let's look at things relatively and where we fit in the world as far as addressing our environment.
German Chancellor,
sorry, we're out of time.
EU...
Minister, we're out of time. Mr. McLean, we're out of time. Ms. Thompson will end the second round with your questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome, Minister, and welcome to the officials. And thank you for the work that you're doing. There continues to be some confusion and conflicting information around carbon pricing. And so to help clarify this, would you explain what carbon pricing is and then why it's important, please?
Thank you for the question. According to most experts who've looked at measures to mitigate the impacts of climate change and reduce greenhouse gas emissions, carbon pricing is known to be, if not the most effective, certainly one of the most effective measures to fight climate change. And the very novelty of the Canadian system is that we're supporting Canadians in the transition by returning the vast majority of the revenues directly to them, which means that countries in South America, countries in Europe, countries in Asia are looking at the Canadian carbon pricing system as being a very interesting one. In fact, between 2022 and between 2021 and 2022, we went from 20% of the world being covered by some form of carbon pricing to 25%. We held an event in Sharm el Sheikh at COP27, where we had representative from the United Kingdom, from Chile, from the World Bank, all coming to sing the praises of Canada's carbon pricing system. It is an essential component of the fight against climate change. And again, anyone who's looked at this will tell you that that's the case.
Thank you. Could you also explain what the Government of Canada is doing with the revenues it collects through the carbon pricing?
So, as I said, the vast majority, 90% of the revenues are recycled directly to Canadians in jurisdictions where the federal system applies. And according to the Parliamentary Budget Officer, today, 8 out of 10 Canadians are better off. They get more money back from the federal government than what the carbon pricing is costing them. But it is about sending a price signal. It is about ensuring that we move away from our dependencies on fossil fuels towards public transit, towards electrification, towards clean technologies. So that's the very purpose, the very nature of the carbon pricing system. The other 10% of revenues is sent back to municipalities, Indigenous communities, and small and medium-sized businesses through either bilateral agreements or government programs.
Thank you. And still staying with some of the misconceptions, what is the federal benchmark and what does it do? And then on the other end of that, why not just let provinces and territories decide for themselves how to price carbon pollution?
Well, the output-based pricing system is what the system, part of the system we're using. There's obviously the fuel charge, but the reason we have set a benchmark federally is that so there's fairness across the Confederation, so that the efforts are similar in all jurisdictions, while allowing for some flexibility in terms of the implementation. But it should be said that we renegotiating the output-based pricing system with every single provinces this year. Well, some last year, but we finalized the negotiations with all of the provinces this year. We negotiated with all of the provinces the output-based pricing system, including Alberta and Saskatchewan and Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, your home province.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Could you also then explain what, it's a slightly different area, but I think still along the same line of confusion, what is the approach to cap and cut oil and gas sector emissions?
Thank you. Basically, as I was saying earlier, the oil and gas sector is 27% of our emissions in Canada, and it is the sector that has seen the fastest growth over the last decade. So the commitment we made during the last election campaign is to cut the emissions, not the production, but the emissions of that sector. We held some consultations before Christmas. We had a consultation paper that was out there in terms of what kind of system we would use. So we are working with officials on draft regulations that should be presented in the coming months, where there will be another round of consultations on these draft regulations, and hoping to have final regulations by the end of the year or the beginning of next year.
Thank you. And that concludes our first hour. Minister?
Mr. Chair,
yes.
Just a point of order. The minister had offered to get the Ministry of Finance to provide some information in writing. I'm wondering if we could make sure that happens, and also on the emissions objective, the interim emissions objective, if we could get a response in writing around that as well.
I'm sure there'll be no problem in getting that. So, well, thank you. Yes, Mr. Lake.
While we're at it, perhaps we could also just get a copy of the regulations that would come into play dealing with upstream and downstream emissions in oil coming from Saudi Arabia, Nigeria, and Russia.
If it's available, I guess, but I don't know much about their databases.
I would hope we have regulations in place, so I'm sure they're available.
Okay. Oh, the regulations here as opposed to in Russia and Nigeria. Okay, that I guess, yeah. Okay, sorry, I misunderstood your question, Mr. Merci, Monsieur le Ministre.
Thank you, Mr. Minister, for appearing before the committee this morning to answer questions on your different portfolios. We hope to see you again soon. And thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, colleagues. We'll take a short break.
Get back for one more hour and 2 rounds of questioning. We'll start. Pardon? Oui, avec Mike. Alors, on est sur le point de débuter.
Yes, we are just about to start. We'll wait a couple more minutes.
Non, 6, même chose que le premier tour. Là. Une ronde de 6 minutes, puis une ronde de...
There's a 6-minute and a 5-minute round.
OK, parfait. Alors, sans plus tard...
So, without further ado, we're going to start our first turn of questions, our first round of questions. Six minutes. Mr. Lake.
I'm going to follow up actually on the same line of questioning that I was asking before. Important to folks in my constituency to understand whether the rules that apply to what they work so hard to produce apply to products coming from outside of Canada. And so a simple question, whether oil coming from outside of Canada, from countries like Saudi Arabia, Nigeria, and Russia, is subject to the same standards, the same regulations around reporting, around anything, regulations on upstream and downstream emissions as oil coming from Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Newfoundland and Labrador, coming into Canada, oil coming into Canada.
Senator Forbes, go ahead.
Thanks for the question. And I'm not an expert in this area, so I would have to get back to you as to what the specific rules that are applied to oil and gas imported from other jurisdictions. The minister talked about international reporting requirements. There would be some, but as to what the specific reporting requirements are for imports of oil and gas, we would have to get back to you on that.
Is there anybody at the table that would have any idea what the regulations would be for oil once it arrives in Canada from other countries?
Well, once it arrives in the country, obviously there'd be rules around transportation, storage, distribution, regulations, some federal, some provincial. I mean, there'd be a long list.
But there would be oil coming from Canada, moving around Canada, is, in a 60-second answer, if someone can give it, is subject to what rules around before it, the before and after, the upstream, downstream part?
So I think that's a big question, and I think it would take more than 60 seconds to give you a good answer. But I would say there are going to be things like transportation and storage regulations, right? So how does it move? By pipeline, by rail, whatever. There'll be different rules depending on that, different regulatory bodies. Storage would be another example, I think.
But there would be rules around before it's in the pipeline in the first place.
There would be regulatory, there are rules, this comes some of it to the permitting process and conditions of operation.
So rules around where it came from, where the oil came from.
How it's produced, there would be within Canada anything that is permitted. Is that fair, Terry?
Yeah, my understanding is that there would be similar rules, whether the oil is produced in Canada or imported from other nations, on how that oil is used and maneuvered around the country.
So as we consider oil moving from one place in our country to another, we have to consider where that oil came from and what the footprint was, the emissions footprint, before it got into the pipeline in the first place. Upstream and downstream emissions, right?
I don't mean to intervene here, and I won't take away from your time, Mr. Lake, but aren't there negotiations or discussions globally about imposing someday, it's not in the offing, but someday special tariffs on products coming into countries based on whether they incorporate a price on carbon in that country? I mean, this is way off in the future, but I think that might be what you're touching on. I'm not sure, but anyway, keep going, and I didn't take any time away from you.
All right. I asked my question.
Can you repeat your last question?
As long as it doesn't go against my time.
Sure, yeah.
So for oil that's in the pipeline moving around our country, we have regulations to determine whether we can even build pipelines in terms of what the upstream and downstream impact of that oil and gas is. Am I just a yes or no answer? We have regulations in that regard, right?
We have requirements for new projects to look at both upstream emissions as well as direct emissions associated with facilities. We don't look at kind of downstream emissions once oil leaves our borders.
Right, okay. And so when oil's coming into our country and presumably gets into a pipeline or gets moved within our country, do we have regulations that look at the upstream impact of those before they get to our border in the first place? In other words, where that oil came from in Nigeria or Saudi Arabia or Russia and what the emissions footprint was of that oil, similar to what we would do for oil coming from Alberta.
If we were looking at a new facility being proposed in the country that would handle petroleum, we would look at those upstream emissions. We currently do not have any facilities that we're looking at to handle imported petroleum.
Yeah, we've made it very difficult to build anything that actually transports oil in any direction in this country. And I think the point that I'm trying to make is that right now there's an advantage given to oil coming from Saudi Arabia and Nigeria in terms of getting to some places in Canada versus oil coming from Alberta, because they're treated under different regimes. The regulatory impact is different. It's the burden is more on oil coming from Alberta than it is on oil coming from Nigeria or refined oil product coming from Russia in the last year, in 2021. It's a statement, I guess, more. No one's disagreeing with me at the table.
Well, we're out of time now. I give you an extra minute. But
thanks.
Ms. No, I'm sorry. You have a little more time. No, yeah, go ahead, Mister. You have another 30 seconds.
That's okay. I mean, I'll give 30 seconds to someone that can articulate what regulation at all, if any, is in place on oil coming from Saudi Arabia, Nigeria, or Russia before it gets to Canada to determine whether it should even be allowed in our country or not.
So none of us, I don't think, have that answer for you, in part because we don't have the details of all the rules that those countries would have in place around regulating projects, et cetera, right? Because that's effectively what we'd have to know to answer that question. So I think the answer is we do not have that information.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The word I was looking for before was border tariff. Yeah. Okay, Ms. Taylor-Roy for 6 minutes, please. No, my list is not up to date. Who's going? Is it Mr. Turnbull? Okay, there was a switch. I get it. Okay.
Thanks,
so,
Chair.
Mr. Turnbull for 6 minutes.
Thanks, Chair, and great to see all the witnesses here today. Thank you for your expertise and your leadership in so many important parts of our environment and climate change strategy. The work you do every day is greatly appreciated. I have concerns about Parks Canada, just given our commitments to land and water protection and the need for biodiversity and the focus certainly on nature-based solutions. I'm concerned that Parks Canada is being impacted by climate change itself, that its assets and its infrastructure are being impacted. And I'm just wondering whether you could give us a bit of an overview of that and whether your budget currently reflects the degree of financing that you need to ensure that Parks Canada can continue to protect its natural assets.
Thank you very much for the question. I'm going to turn to David Miller, who is our Vice President of Real Property and Assets, to respond to your question. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you for the question. Certainly, climate change is an ever-present consideration in the management of our natural and built assets, our cultural heritage assets and natural heritage. It's something we're facing and trying to manage every day. It's particularly notable in our northern sites where we're dealing with melting permafrost. It's very much noteworthy in our coastal sites where we're dealing with erosion and storm surge and increasingly intense storms. We saw this, for example, in Hurricane Fiona, where a number of our sites across the Atlantic were affected. And so I think we're taking a number of strategies to try and deal with that in terms of adaptation. Certainly in terms of our physical infrastructure, we're not just building back like for like, but we're trying to look at ways to make our infrastructure more resilient to impacts of climate change, whether that's setbacks from the coast or a variety of other techniques. We were fortunate in the case of Hurricane Fiona to receive supplementary funding that has helped us to do that building back and increasing resilience. And it's a factor that we consider in all of our planning now, whether it's our management planning for our parks and sites or our investment planning, so that we're considering climate resiliency and also considering how we can reduce our contribution to climate change by making our operations more efficient and reducing greenhouse gas emissions.
That's great to hear. Thank you for that response. I also note that I have a really strong youth council in my riding, and time again, the youth talk about the importance of environment and climate change. So, just protection and conservation of our environment is something that they rate very high. It's probably number one on their list every single time we talk. That and mental health supports for youth. But climate seems to rank pretty highly. So I'm just wondering whether you can speak to what Parks Canada is doing to support the next generation of leaders, of young leaders for climate resilience.
Great. Thank you very much for the question. And I have to say that Parks Canada is a leader in the federal government for youth employment. Annually, we hire approximately 1,600 students to work across the country in rural, remote communities. And the jobs that we provide range from science, conservation, protection, visitor experience, and really it is an entryway for us to bring youth into conservation and protection, and also to expose youth to cultural heritage and heritage spaces across the country. So we're very proud to be partnering with ESDC in youth employment in this country.
It's great to hear. How much time do I have, Chair?
A little over 2 minutes.
Great. In terms of the national program called Ecological Corridors, I'm kind of interested in the benefits of that program, if someone wouldn't mind giving an overview of those. I know connecting the lands that are being preserved and having those ecological corridors is something that will aid us in terms of protecting biodiversity, and there's a whole bunch of natural systems that are supported by having that. So just wondered if you could give an overview of that.
Absolutely. Thank you again for the question. I'll turn to Jewel Cunningham, who is our Vice President of Strategic Policy, to touch on that. But just as a brief introduction, Parks Canada is very active in the preservation of land and contributes dramatically to the targets for 25 by 25 and 30 by 30. But it's connecting them where we really get the true value of the conservation and protection activities. So I'll turn to Jewel to talk about the benefits of the corridors.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you so much for the question. Biodiversity is declining at unprecedented rates, and habitat loss and fragmentation are important contributors to the decline. And as you've stated, climate change is also increasing the likelihood of extreme temperature and precipitation, increasing frequency and intensity of wildfires, droughts, and floods. So for that purpose, many species need to be able to transit from one protected place to another. And ecological corridors would make a means in which species can transverse from one protected area to another. In addition to that, it's also a tremendous opportunity to work in partnership with municipalities, with stakeholders and Indigenous partners, as well as to increase opportunities for Indigenous peoples to connect to the land and to be stewards and to maintain that connection. Also for communities and for people to promote human-wildlife coexistence in ways that are positive both for communities and youth, as you've mentioned previously, but also in the protection of species. And finally, to mitigate the effects of climate change and to foster those collaborations to do that same effort. Thank you very much for the question.
Thank you. Any time left, or is that my time? I think that's close to my time.
You're done, yeah. Just 5 seconds over. So good questions, though. I hope you'll come see us again at the environment. Madame Posé, 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you. I'll have interesting questions to ask. Yes, surely. So I'm coming back to Trans Mountain. In the supplementary estimates, $2.54 million. Where did this go? It went to Trans Mountain, but for what? To what end? I'm going to talk about subsidies. Yes, this is dedicated to our efforts to engage the Indigenous communities. Okay, I have another question. It has a link with fossil fuels subsidies. You know that we're studying a report here before the committee. Could you give us an update when there is an evaluation by peers? We are twinned with Argentina, so where are we in the analysis? Has the report been published? Has it been tabled? Within the G7 and G20, I'll have to come back on this. I don't have the answer. Okay. Now for the main estimates. We know and we hear that we need to fund adapting to climate change as we are funding causes of climate change, businesses that are responsible for the climate crisis. Well, we also have to fund for adaptation. Is there anything in the main estimates where there is money specifically for adaptation? We talked about the protection of berms, this kind of thing. Is there a lot of money for that? Well, I can ask Linda to answer. Thank you. There was an announcement last fall with regards to the national strategy for adaptation. Right now, we are working on the process in order to put the funding over the next year. When we'll come back for A, B, or C, money will be there. And to engage with the Canadian community, we need to adapt to new ways of doing things. Okay, but I'm trying to understand, if it's not in the overall budget, then you're going to have extra measures afterwards. It seems to me, if you have the budget speech and you're looking at what's going to happen, then you implement laws. But if there's nothing for the main estimates, is that what you're saying? Not for what is tabled today, 2024. Okay, I have a question on meetings. Because not just the minister, but there are many meetings with lobbying groups for the fossil fuel industry. There's an organization that I took note of in September. There was it's a greenwashing. They had 16 meetings in September, the Pembina pipeline, 14 meetings, and the Minister of the Environment 9 times met with them. And in December, many meetings were held with lobbying groups, about 5 times a day, actually. So there are people from the department present at these meetings, but you don't have to meet with these lobbyists. Of course, we'll never know what happens behind closed doors, but does this not have an influence on policies that are set forth by the government? Thank you for the question. I'd say no. I'd say no to the final question. I would say that it's our responsibility that we try to implement or to create a set-out regulation. We do have to speak with industry players, to companies. So this is the process that we have followed in this case. Okay, I understand, but when it's the equivalent of 5 times a day, as in December, that's a huge amount of meetings. And the organizations that defend the environment, there are lawyers, there are biologists, there are experts. They have a hard time in having access. It's not 5 times a day. They have a hard time having access to the minister. How can you justify this? Well, I can't talk to the 5 times a day. Well, it's equivalent of 5 times a day. Well, those are your figures. I don't have anything to the contrary to submit, but I would say that it's important. And I think on our side, we have to meet with people who want to speak with us, and we're open to discussing key issues with all organizations. Well, you speak quite often, it seems. Well, I'm new, and so I've received a lot of letters, either from businesses, organizations, and NGOs. Yes, so I'd like to come back with the Canadian Water Agency. There are sums of money that have been given out, but here's my question. For everything that has to do with water will be studied as of the fall. There is the creation of the Canadian Water Agency, and monies have already been sent out to create the agency. Aren't you putting the cart before the horse here? How is this going to work? something new is being created, so we have to be ready. We have to be prepared. So this is how we're working on it. We don't know what form it's going to take exactly, but we are working. We've begun the work. Thank you. And now, Mrs. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just maybe quickly to Environment and Climate Change Canada, I asked the Minister what the 2026 interim emissions reduction objective was, and just wondering if you folks had the answer to that.
Yeah, so it's 20%.
Great. And can you?
Oh, sorry.
Oh yeah, just can you tell me what evidence or modeling that was based on?
I could not tell you that right now.
Do you mind following up in writing?
Well, but maybe I'll explain a little
sure.
bit. I mean, we set the main target, obviously, of the 40 to 45%. And I mean, if you think about a pathway, a signal that we would be on track, 20% by 2026 would be, I think, so I don't have any modeling to back it up, but that's kind of the story there. I mean,
the
we'll
logic.
update that when we do the emissions reduction plan update. We will have
And
that.
do you anticipate that Canada is going to surpass or fall short of that target? Do you have a trajectory at this current moment in terms of whether we're on track or off track?
Well, we published through the UN FCCC in December, our report there that showed, the modeling showed we were still on track for the 40%. We will update that as part of this progress report, but until that work is done, we need to probably engage with provinces.
And sorry, I'm just more in terms of looking ahead at whether or not we're going to meet the 2026 objective. And do you have a sense so far of whether we are on track to meet that? And if so, kind of what, if we're not going to meet it, kind of what the difference would be, especially I'd love to concretely know in tons of CO2.
So I would say, I think based on the last round of modeling we've done, we think it's on track for 2026 and 2030. But we'll be updating that modeling over the course of, the spring, summer, and into the fall, and that'll give us a clear idea with, budgets and other things. Sorry for the long-winded.
Thanks. Quick question for Parks Canada. The National Historic Sites, the contributions in support of the National Historic Site Cost-Sharing Program in the 2022-2023 main estimates were about $1 million. And then in the 2023 and 2024 main estimates, it shows it's decreased to $700,000. And in 2017, this committee had witnesses come explaining that the contributions in the cost-sharing program are simply not enough. So I'm just curious, can you give an explanation for why the amount has decreased?
Yes, absolutely. The amount hasn't decreased. What you see is $700,000 for contributions, but you'll see in a different section of the mains where it's $300,000 for grants. So we now have the authority to issue grants as opposed to contributions. So it's $1 million in the main estimates, and internally we reallocate $1 million additionally because there is such high demand for the program. So it is a $2 million a year budget.
Thank you so much for that explanation. And yeah, I'm curious also when it comes to Parks Canada. Thinking about, Mr. Turnbull had asked about some of the impacts of climate change on parks. And I know that Parks Canada is also looking at how it engages with Indigenous communities. Indigenous communities are often kind of hardest hit by climate change. And I'm just curious about that interaction around climate change, Indigenous communities, and how Parks Canada is addressing this.
Again, thanks very much for the question. I'd have to say with Parks Canada, almost everything we do is an active engagement and collaboration with our Indigenous partners. From the establishment of new sites, national parks, national marine conservation areas, we're also working on an Indigenous stewardship framework for our cultural assets. So we bring our Indigenous partners to the table for all that we do. And sometimes it takes a bit longer because we really do try to drive to consensus and bring in Indigenous knowledge systems, Indigenous science, and their culture into how we administer Parks Canada places and how we establish new sites going forward.
Thank you so much. Back to ECCC and the kind of question around the emissions reduction objective for 2026. When it comes to the concrete or the largest emissions reduction pieces to meet those targets and to be on track, can you name a couple and what the kind of funding for programs are that are currently happening?
Well, we've talked about the big sectors. Obviously, are going to be, oil and gas. They're going to be transportation, buildings, and other things, right? So we have a range of. Do you want me to go through all the programming?
More, it's just those three in particular. There was a report just released by the Canadian Climate Institute showing that those three in particular, they have actually gone up since 2005. Other areas have decreased, but in oil and gas, it's an increase of 10%, but since 2005, transportation is up, and the buildings as well. And so just curious if there's a assuring that especially the oil and gas sector is doing its share when it comes to emissions reduction.
So I think the government's laid out some existing and some proposed pieces. The minister talked about potential oil and gas cap and a discussion paper that was out last year as part of the way to work on that. Obviously, I also have other programming tools. With transportation, extensive work on zero-emitting vehicles. Regulation is out on that. Requirements around, share of market. And I think there's a commitment for the Minister of Natural Resources around moving to no emissions in buildings, right? So there are all those pieces together, individually tackle those sectors.
We'll have to go to our second round now, the 5-minute round, starting with Mr. McLean.
Oh, thank you, officials. Mr. Forbes, I recognize you're new in the job for 1 month, so I don't mind if you defer some of these questions to your colleagues that might have more detail that I'm asking for here. Grants and contributions from your ECCC in particular, up to $1.23 billion in this year's estimates versus $577 million in 2021, more than a double as far as grants and contributions go. Would you say this is a lot of overspending going into a lot of new programming?
No.
Okay, good answer. Thank you. So you're talking about your department going up by a 42% increase. You're talking about the Impact Assessment Agency going up with a budget increase of 38% over this year versus 2021. And Parks Canada, paltry 11%. So I don't know how Chrystia Freeland, Minister of Finance, is going to balance a budget if even the organization such as yours is going up by such egregious amounts at the end of the day. I guess the proof will be in the telling there, but let's get into the numbers here. Canada's International Finance Program, $6 million in 2021 and $45 million this year for international finance. Can you tell us what's going into Canada's International Finance Program grants and contributions?
I might ask Linda to take the detailed question.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for the question. So the grants and contribution for the International Finance Program is mainly to help the developing countries to adapt to the climate change and build that resilience within their own countries. So this is where we have that funding.
Yes, thank you very much. So at COP26, developed countries committed $100 billion to developing countries, and you're saying that this $45 million is just one drop in the bucket towards that $100 billion that developing countries are going to contribute?
I mean, the broader Canadian commitment is $5.3 billion out of that.
Over what time frame?
It's over 5 years.
Okay, so it should be, accrual would give you about $1 billion plus a year?
So that would largely and almost entirely sit with Global Affairs Canada.
Okay,
would be the
so at a
largest.
time when we're vastly overspending in this country and we're running deficits at supposedly full employment, we're going to continue to spend more money on international commitments around the world. We're going to increase this deficit?
The spending commitment is $5 billion over 5 years as part of a global commitment to hit $100 billion US dollars.
All right, thank you. More on this, the Low Carbon Economy Fund expands from $243 million to $666 million this year. Can you briefly go into why that is increasing at more than a double, if you will?
The program was renewed, I believe it was announced in Budget 2022 at an expanded level with a broader kind of mandate. So there are, I think the minister mentioned this in his remarks, there are 3 or 4 streams. There's some money that goes to provinces for bigger projects. There's some challenges.
Is it accomplishing anything at the end of the day as far as greenhouse gas reductions?
Well, the program was launched, the Revitalize program was launched in Budget 2022, so I wouldn't have any information.
And likewise, the Canada Nature Fund, well, conserving nature goes from $430 million from 222 years ago, so again, a double. Would you put the 2 billion trees program under this conserving nature program?
I think that largely sits with Natural Resources Canada, the budget for the $2 billion tree program.
Okay, so this 2 billion trees, the cost of those trees isn't in this conserving nature part of the budget here, part of the estimate. So thank you very much. The other questions I would have are, the publication of your reports. I know one of the things in here, one of the items that's indicated in the estimates is the minister's ability to engage consultants. And these consultants are not necessarily giving the advice that the government needs here. And I had the Deputy Minister of Natural Resources in front of the Procedures Committee. And effectively, he said that they're making up the numbers. He said he could not provide where they're getting the sources on their triple your department's estimates on the reductions in greenhouse gas emissions from the hydrogen economy. I would like to know which consultants you're using to get all of your data that I find highly suspect.
I might answer the question a different way, which is, we get our data would come from a number of sources. It depends what we're talking about, but I think the minister mentioned we have, for climate change data, for example, there's a UN approved process. It's scientifically collected.
Okay.
And reported
let me drill the heart of the matter.
We're out of time here.
Okay.
Yeah, so we'll go to Mr. Duguid.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got a few comments and then a question or two to officials. And first of all, I want to thank Ms. Collins for raising the freshwater issue. I'm just back from the UN Water Conference, the first conference of its type at the UN in 50 years. Mr. Chair, I know you have an abiding interest, and of course, I'll be sharing what I've learned with this committee as we embark on our freshwater study. But 6,000 delegates, 1,500 side events, 80 or so Canadians that attended, and it was a very rewarding experience for us all. I just want to thank our ECCC officials, particularly Michael Goffin and Gemma Bogue, who put together a great program and made Canada's presence felt on the world stage. So thank you for that. And while we were there, we heard about the $420 million that would be dedicated to the largest freshwater body on Earth, and that is the Great Lakes. So good news. But I wonder if officials could confirm, and this is in response to some of Ms. Collins' questions. So last budget 2022, we booked, whatever term you want to use, I believe the figure is $47 million over 5 years to establish the agency and get it up and running. Is that correct? Am I correct in my facts?
Yeah, you are.
Right. So I think the figure $3 million in the brief from the Library of Parliament is a little confusing. That may be the money that's been drawn so far, but we do project in the budget that it's going to be $47 million.
Thank you for the question. I'll clarify the $3 million that you can find in the supplementary estimates. This was a question with respect to the funding we received for transition office. So we got a little bit of funding like in budget 2021, which was like totalizing $17 million. A part of it was for the fiscal year that just ended, 22-20, or will be ending this week, sorry. And it's really for transition purposes. So it's not going toward Canada Water Agency per se, because it hasn't been created, but it's to enable us to come together to what's the plan with respect to the creation of the agency. That being said, there is in our mains, in the total of our mains, already freshwater funding there in G's and C's, so we can contribute to keeping the Great Lakes all together.
Ms. Drainville makes a really good point. Another comment, Mr. Chair. But the amount for the Great Lakes, it's 420 plus 80 million for a total of $500 million. That's halfway there, Ms. Collins. And who knows? Tomorrow is the budget, and we may hear some more good news on freshwater. I certainly hope so. And I imagine some of the detail surrounding the 420 million and how it will be spent may be laid out in the budget. Is that correct?
I think either in the budget or in the weeks that follow, we will certainly get more details and clarify how we're going to proceed.
And I don't want to preempt the budget, and of course no one knows what's in the budget except a few select folks. I'll just move on to one final question, Mr. Chairman, as my time winds down. So we've made this has been in throne speeches, in mandate letters, a commitment to establish a Canada Water Agency, a freshwater action plan. 500 million of that is been announced, and we are going to modernize the Canada Water Act, and my understanding is that the act is going to be modernized with a climate change lens front and center, and Indigenous rights being an important component. I wonder if anyone at the table would comment on, and particularly the issue of addressing the Indigenous rights issue in light of UNDRIP and the importance of fresh water to Indigenous people, which of course they emphasized when we were at the UN. And you've got 15 seconds.
Well, I think you've hit on the important points. I think that the key for us will be obviously engagement. One of the keys will be engagement with Indigenous peoples, with Indigenous communities, to understand their needs, their expectations, and make sure that we work with them and in any way we move forward.
Merci. Alors, Madame Posé.
Thank you, Mrs. Posey. Yes. I'm going to come back to what Mr. Duguay was saying. With this 3 million, can you tell us where we are with the development? I believe that Mrs. Drainville was answering and said that this will serve to the plan, but where are we in the development of this agency right now? We don't have a formal decision as to the form that it will take, this agency. But preparatory efforts are being made, so there is a team that is working on this to deliver the mandate of the agency. So work has to be done in the beginning in order to prepare for a decision to be made to launch this agency. Okay, because I know that some people have been waiting. My other question is for Parks Canada. We know the commitment that was made during COP15 to protect 30% of land between now and 2030. Could you tell us how many organizations, or more or less, what are the organizations, what are the departments that will be involved in this protection effort?
In terms of the organizations involved in this protection effort, it's a wide range of stakeholders, provinces, municipalities, and Indigenous groups. So I don't have an exact detailed list. The list is extremely long. So as I said earlier, everything we do within Parks Canada is relationship-based, collaboration-based, with a high level of engagement.
D'accord. All right. And I would like to come back to Environment and Climate Change Canada. You have 876 million in the budget for activities. It says linked to measures seeking for clean growth and climate change. Could you tell us what are these measures for clean growth and how will we reach our Paris objectives? I think this is the title for We don't have any more time. I'm sorry. Mrs. Collins.
Mr. Chair. And I wanted to ask a question about Indigenous-led forest stewardship, and following up on Mr. Weiler's questions about the Old Growth Fund. You know, for the past few years, I, along with my NDP colleagues, have been pushing the government to provide funding for First Nations communities on the coast to ensure that they can do Indigenous-led forest stewardship, and that funding should both be short-term funding to financially compensate them when deferrals are made, the kind of intermediate funding for consultation within the community, as well as long-term funding to implement the Indigenous-led forest stewardship plans. And so with this Old Growth Fund, I'm curious if it covers all three of those kind of stages of supporting First Nations in Indigenous-led forest stewardship. And just as a quick comment, you know, we're pushing for $500 million, and this is a very small fraction of that. So I'm curious where this funding is going and if you think it'll be adequate to support nations in this work.
I would have to get back to you on the details of how that programming is split up, like how it's what the various lines of it. So I don't have that answer for you right now. You know, it's what we've got to work with right now, and we'll use it as a way of moving forward. And certainly, you know, our goal is always to make sure the funding is sufficient to move forward where we need to get to in terms of stewardship, right?
Thanks. And yeah, you know, it is so critical that we are protecting the last of our ancient forests. These are critical ecosystems, but also, you know, that this work really, the federal government has a responsibility to support nations in this critical work, and these nations have been stewarding their land since time immemorial. So if you could follow up in writing, I would love to see the breakdown of where that money is going. Thank you. And then just a question about the breakdown of the money, the grants and contributions for First Nations communities on the Trans Mountain Expansion Project. Is there another level of detail that I could see in terms of how the government is spending that money, where the money is going?
I don't think so, unfortunately.
Okay,
Thank you. We'll go now to Mr. Deltel for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to your House. Welcome to your Committee on the Environment.
Men in the team, so be welcome. You make me laugh when you said earlier that since you arrived, you receive a lot of invitation. Well, welcome to the club. When I was appointed by my honorable leader, a critic for climate change and environmental issue, sincerely, on a daily basis, I receive around 100 invitations during the first week, each and every day. So, well, this is what Canada is all about. A wide country, 10 provinces, all localities, and first and foremost, people. Because those people are very involved when we talk about climate change. And so this is why you have plenty of groups, and this is what we appreciate. Monsieur le Président, j'aimerais revenir sur les deux.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to come back on the two themes that I spoke about earlier with the Minister. First of all, COP27, that was held in Egypt, we spent over $1 million for hotel rooms. And I'd like to draw your attention to one thing in particular. Reef Oasis Blue Bay Resort seems like it was a really nice place. One room, 17 nights, $700 a room. Well, the fact that we went from 17 nights for one person, the conference was a 12-day conference, so what was this person doing before or after the conference for 17 days? Mrs. Dravid, thank you. Thank you for the question. Naturally, as you said, the conference lasted 12 days. Some people went ahead of time to deal with logistics, and they had to stay 24 hours afterwards to make sure that everything was happening properly with the return. So that's why. Okay. Now this hotel, where there was a large 113 people for 12 nights. This is part of the most expensive hotel rooms available. So why did the Canadian delegation, 113 people, find themselves in the most expensive hotel? Thank you for the question. You'll understand that these events are really secure. We have to work with the host country. We have to go to pre-authorized hotels. In this case, we use the hotel list that was provided by the host country, and that is why you can see some delegations in some specific hotels. Same as we did here with the Biodiversity Conference in Montreal. We wanted to ensure safety and security. Yes, so we are kind of a hostage to the organizers. We understand, but we also understand that we were in the most expensive hotel, over $1,500 a night, and for a room, and there were many like that. What measures can we take for the next COP that will be held in Dubai? Last time I checked, it's not a very inexpensive place. We understand that. What measures will be taken to make sure that we don't spend exorbitant amounts? $1 million in hotel rooms in Egypt is a lot of money. I would say that our goal is always to keep the costs at a minimum, if possible, for such an event. So we'll look at the options with regards to hotels, costs. You've already mentioned the delegation size. We're going to make sure that we pay for people that we need to have there. That's how it happens for all events where we participate. So this is the type of exercise that we do every time. Now I'd like to deal with the use of the Prime Minister's plane. I'd like to be clear with everyone. I know it's normal that the Prime Minister travels throughout the country. That's his job, and that's great. There's ways of doing things that are kind of questionable, though. A return trip, Ottawa-Montreal. It's a 22-minute flight. So for us, it's not appropriate to use the plane, especially for a person who says that climate change is important. And as the Prime Minister was saying at the Montreal conference, we make a choice of fighting against climate change. We have to take this seriously. If you take a plane for a 22-minute flight, that's not taking people seriously. It's taking them for idiots.
Mr. Deltel, but go ahead.
Well, Mr. Chair, that is a political question that was addressed by the minister. That is not.
Well,
he doesn't.
They don't have to address it because the time is out.
Okay.
So.
This is exactly what I said.
Yeah. So
Thank you, Terry.
we'll go, Mr. Turnbull, you're batting cleanup today, and well, who's taking the last question on? I'm so sorry, Mr. Weiler, you're batting cleanup. You have 5 minutes, Mr. Weiler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's actually Ms. Taylor-Roy that's batting cleanup here.
Hey.
Actually, I'd like to ask questions about Parks Canada, and in particular, the progress that we've been making with Parks Canada to try and hit our ambitious goals of 25% by 25 and the 30 by 30. And maybe you just talk a little bit about how Parks Canada is helping with that initiative.
Great, thank you very much. In terms of Parks Canada contribution to the 25 by 25, we're doing it in two ways. One is on our territorial land-based commitments, and so we are moving towards creation of 10 national parks, 10 national urban parks, and 10 national marine conservation areas. So that's on the water side. So those are progressing very well within the agency and will increase our contribution to the 25 by 25 and the 30 by 30.
Thank you. And just a question. I saw there was an increase in the funding for the Trans-Canada Trail, something that I'm very interested in as well. How is that project going, and how close are we to completing the connections across the country?
Great. Thank you very much for the question. Yes, I think it was in Budget 21 that $55 million was announced over 5 years for expansion of the Trans-Canada Trail. That is 27,000 kilometers of trail throughout many urban, rural, and remote communities within Canada. And we are progressing very, very well, flowing $11 million per year to the Trans-Canada Trail Association to create access routes from communities into the trail. Really, the focus is improving accessibility. And I think it's about 80% of Canadians already live within 30 minutes of the trail, but making it easier for them to have direct access, including those with disabilities, to the various routes of the Trans-Canada Trail. So it's going extremely well. And there's also some work going on in the Rouge National Parks. There was $2 million over 2 years announced for the Rouge, and we're making great progress in connecting the Rouge National Park to the Trans-Canada Trail. So it's been a really exciting project and one that's valued by Canadians. So thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. And I believe our chair has a question, so I'm going to give the
Thank
remainder
you,
of my time
Ms.
to the
Taylor
chair.
Roy. I appreciate that. I'm just wondering if you could give us an update on where we're at in terms of designating the monarch butterfly as an endangered species.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have much to share with you. Obviously, that's something that I'll have to come back to that at a later date.
Would it be possible to send me an email on that or something? Just
Can have someone do that?
Yeah, yeah. Because the big issue in my riding, there's the monarchs at the airport in Montreal, and I know the minister it's been recommended by COSEWIC that the butterfly be considered an endangered species. That was in 2016, and now I think we're in consultations to somehow implement that recommendation. I'd be really interested in knowing where that's at, and I thank you for that. And I want to thank. Do you have anything else, Ms. Taylor? No. Okay. So I want to thank.
Just to thank our witnesses. And
I want to thank our witnesses for being here and speaking to the estimates. As a committee, we have one more a task to complete here before we break today, and we have to vote on the. Thank you again. Thank you for being here. We have to vote on the estimates. So we have a number of votes. 13
seconds.
Yeah, we have votes 1, 5, and 10 are under the Department of Environment. Votes 1 and 5 under the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada, and votes 1, 5, and 10 under Parks Canada. This is for the main estimates, right? Yeah, okay. So shall vote 1 less the interim supply under the Department of Environment. I'm sorry. So I'm going to read the French. Le crédit 1 moins le montant attribué sous la rubrique Ministère de l'Environnement.
Shall vote 1 minus the interim supply under Department of Environment Agency carry. Shall vote 5 minus the interim supply under the Department of the Environment carry. On division. Shall vote 10 minus the interim supply under Department of the Environment carry. On division. Shall vote 1 minus the interim supply under Impact Assessment Agency of Canada carry. On division. Shall vote 5 minus the interim supply under Impact Assessment Agency of Canada carry. On division. Shall vote 1 minus the interim supply under Parks Canada Agency carry. On division. Shall vote 5 minus the interim supply under Parks Canada Agency carry. On division, I imagine. Shall vote 10 minus the interim supply under Parks Canada Agency carry. On division. Should I make a report to the House? Well, you don't have a choice. Well, we could wait. We could wait for it to be adopted automatically. Thank you. On Thursday, we will discuss a type of supplementary report on Bill S5, and on which the government should study in the future. If we end that, we'll see. I'm not sure that we will end with that, but if we do, we will continue with our review on fossil fuel subsidies. Have a wonderful day. We'll see you at CUPE.